Hey, what's up? Now, I built this piece a couple of years ago, but I did it in kind of a three-part, weird, strung-out video, and you guys have been wanting, a consolidated, easy-to-find place to do a nice built-in, so we thought we'd smush it all together, make it super easy for you guys to follow. The entire build is in this video, so follow along and build one yourself. Also, in the video description, you're going to find a link to the Bourbon blade, which I'm happy to report is in stock on the website right now, ready to ship. We have a limited supply, so if you want one of these shipped to your door in a matter of days, click the link in the video description, get yours right now before they run out again and we got to do the whole pre-order thing. So follow the video, get yourself a Bourbon blade, and enjoy. Almost forgot to tell you, there's also plans available. So if you don't want to have to do it yourself, just you can buy the plans. I put the entire thing on SketchUp to get my measurements exactly how I want them. There's going to be 4 separate boxes that make up little cabinet doors on the top, drawers on the bottom. There's going to be inset panels on each box along the back side, decorative casing on the one visible end, and that's about it. With our cut sheet laid out, it's time to start, well, cutting pieces. To make this cabinet, we're going to be using this beautiful specimen, A1 birch plywood. Isn't she lovely? The nice thing about cabinets is your width is typically very consistent, whether that be your side pieces or your cross brace pieces. So I set my table saw to that desired width, in this case 15.5 inches, and I just start slicing up my plywood. After I slice it all up on the table saw to get long sheets of 15.5 inch pieces, I take it over to the chop saw and I break them down. Sure, I could use a track saw and do this in one pass, but if there's one thing you've learned from watching my videos, it's probably that I'm pretty lazy. So I just cut halfway through on the chop saw and then flip it over and cut the remaining distance. Once I have all my pieces cut, we have to add a 1/4 inch groove. Oh, no, we're not there yet. Then I cut down some 3.5 inch pieces that will be all my little internal brace pieces connecting the cabinets and giving them strength. So yeah, I cut down a bunch of 3.5 inch pieces. And then I have all my pieces cut and I'm ready to start prepping them to hook together. Okay, here's where we get to the 1/4 inch groove. We got to put a 1/4 inch groove on all of our pieces to house our back 1/4 inch panel. So I take a 1/4 inch setup block and a 1/2 inch setup block. Now this is where I make a huge mistake. I've built cabinets like this 100 times. I know I need a 1/4 inch setup block and a 3/4 inch setup block. But for some reason here, stupidly, I grabbed the 1/2 inch setup block, and yes, it will come back to bite me later. But dumb, naive Jason doesn't know that yet, so just don't bother him. Let him live in ignorant bliss for now. We're running this groove to house the 1/4 inch panel on the back of our cabinets. So with our saw blade set at a 1/4 inch, I run it through first to make an 1/8 inch gap, and then I slide the saw blade over and I run it through again to get my 1/4 inch. Why not just do it in one pass with a dado stack? Well, by doing 2 passes, I can really fine tune that distance and make sure it's a nice tight fit on my 1/4 inch panel. With all of the grooves cut to house that back panel, it's time to cut the larger groove to hold our internal shelf. So I insert a dado stack with a 3/4 inch dado, and then I cut a test piece and make sure it's a nice tight fit on all my panel pieces. And then I hit it a ridiculous amount of times with a mallet. I don't know why I did this. Just keep hitting it, Jason, you moron. But anyways, that's a nice tight fit. So then I take half of my pieces, and with that 1/4 inch groove at the top, I run them through the table saw. Now, you could use a router to do this exact same thing, but the table saw is quick and easy. I wouldn't want to do this on any pieces longer than this though. This is about at my max of running them through on the table saw and still feeling comfortable. After doing all of our pieces with the groove at the top, we take the other half of our pieces, making sure the groove is at the bottom, and we do the exact same thing. These will make up the two sides of our boxes. That being said, I should say that you're only running this dadoed groove on your side pieces, not your internal shelf. There's no need for a dado on your internal shelf. Next, we're going to take all of our 3.5-inch connecting pieces and we're going to drill pocket holes in them. Why, God? Why? Well, it's because pocket holes are amazing for one thing, and that's building cabinets. So I take all those pieces and I just start drilling them out until I have all of them ready to go for hooking my cabinet together. Then with all of our pieces cut and prepped, we can start hooking our boxes together. I start by applying a little glue into that cut dadoed slot, and then I will insert my cross shelf piece and pound it down with a mallet. So I get everything lined up, my grooves are lined up on the back side, and then I can just hit it in place. If I could find my mallet bangy thing. I don't know. Oh, jeez, it's way the heck over here. I got it. All right, so when I set my cross shelf, what I like to do is I like to just tap it in so it's just barely seated. Now, it's a lot easier to seat this fully once it's flipped over and you're banging on the outer side piece instead of that 3/4 inch panel. Plus, you don't want to chip up your veneer by just smacking away on that 3/4 inch shelf. So once I get it seated, then I flip the whole thing over and I will hammer it home from the other side. This is just a much bigger surface to get the mallet on, and you're not going to break or damage anything. Once that's nice and seated in there, tight, I flip it over, and then I add these woodpecker's clampy 90-degree angle thingy-mabobs. These are great when you're putting together cabinet boxes because they just ensure everything stays nice and square while you're connecting all your parts and pieces. I'll leave a link to these in the video description below. Then with those clamped on so I know my cross panel is square, I just countersink a few screws right into that cross panel from the outside. I'm just using 1.5 inch screws. You don't need a lot. These are just in place of clamps while that glue dries. Then once you get one side done, you do the exact same thing to the other side. Add a little glue, insert your panel, and then you don't usually have to flip it over on this go because you got a nice big surface to get your mallet on already. So once I get that smacked in nice and tight, I add some more woodpecker's clampy things to the other side, and I hook that side in with a few more screws. With our internal shelf nice and secure, we can start adding all of our little brace pieces that will just shore up our cabinet, give it some strength, as well as give us a surface to attach it to the wall when we get to installing it. So first I install this little brace piece right under the shelf. I just add a little glue, clamp it to the shelf, and then I hook it in place with some pocket screws. Then I like to send a few trim head screws right through the top of the shelf into that brace piece, just to hold it nice and tight. This also helps square up your whole cabinet. Once I have that done, I flip the cabinet on its face and I add a few support pieces to the bottom. We'll eventually be adding some more support pieces to the top, but we're not going to do that yet because we want to be able to slide our 1/4 inch panel into the back of our cabinet. So once we get one brace piece done, we flip it over, and of course we do the other brace piece. And then because this cabinet is made up of 4 identical boxes, when you get one box done, you just move on to the other 3. And do the exact same thing until all 4 of your boxes are complete. Then with all of your boxes complete, you can, well, line them up and begin to get an idea of the overall size of your built-in. So you set one down and then another. I don't need to explain this. It's obvious what I'm doing. I'm just lining all the boxes up together like this. This is going to be our built-in. Cabinet doors on the top and drawers on the bottom. So with all of our boxes complete to this point, we can start ripping down our pieces to insert as our back panels. For this, I'm using a piece of 1/4-inch birch ply. So I start by ripping it down to the correct height on the table saw. Then I can take this long piece and I can cut it up into smaller pieces that are the correct width to slide into each one of my cabinets. For this, I'm just using the track saw, and I don't even clamp the track on there. I just set it on there and go for it. If it's off a little bit, it doesn't matter, as long as it's covered up by your 1/4-inch groove on either side. And boom, you just slide it in there, then wash, rinse, repeat on all your remaining cabinet boxes. You might be wondering, why am I doing 4 separate boxes? Why don't I do 1 long box or 2 longer boxes? Well, it's because it's way easier to install this in 4 separate pieces than one giant piece you gotta try and maneuver into place and carry through doorways. With 4 separate pieces, the installation will be a breeze, and I will show you how to accomplish that and still make it look like one giant connected piece when you're all done. So with all of our back panels cut and inserted, we're going to lock them in place with these little 3.5-inch brace pieces we cut. Now 4 of those brace pieces should have gotten a 1/4-inch groove for this exact purpose. They sit on top of that panel, holding it in place nice and tight, and are secured with, pocket screws. Then we add the front brace piece. Now you could have totally added this front brace piece earlier. It doesn't get in the way of you inserting that back panel at all, but it's just easier to do it when all your cabinets are upright in the same position rather than trying to fumble with it when your cabinet's laid down on your workbench. But you do you, whatever is easiest. I mean, if it works, it works. Then with all of our brace pieces in place, we just have a few more pieces to add on the back of our cabinet. Now these are what is called a nailer strip. They're little strips that we can send some screws through to hook the cabinet securely to the wall. There'll be one on the top and the bottom. And this is why we set that 1/4-inch groove a 1/2 inch. Oh crap. Remember when I said I should have used a 3/4 inch? Yeah, it's because all my little cross brace pieces are 3/4 inch. And because I only did a 1/2 inch, they stick out. Luckily, I had some 1/2 inch stock laying around, so I cut some new brace pieces that were only a 1/2 inch thick, and I inserted them into place. Not that big of a mistake, I was just being dumb. So keep that in mind. However far you inset that 1/4 inch groove is how much room you're going to have to insert your nailer strips. So if you inset it 3/4 of an inch, well then you can use all your 3/4 inch ply. If you do it a 1/2 inch like Idiot Jason, well you're going to have to cut some 1/2 inch ply, but we got it done in the end. After installing my upper and lower pieces with pocket screws, I send some more of these trim head screws right through the top just to snug everything up. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to leave these in 4 separate pieces to make installing them much, much easier. We can just carry each individual box into the house when we need to put it in place. But for now, we want them all hooked together so that we can get our face frame and drawers and cabinet doors all figured out without them flopping all over the place. So after clamping them together nice and tight, making sure they're lined up well, I send a few screws through the lower portion that you're not going to see, and 1 screw through the upper portion right under that top brace piece. This will be hidden behind the face frame, and you're not going to see it either. So I just do that to all my cabinet boxes, hooking them together nice and securely. And with that, the carcass of our built-in is complete, and it is time to start working on our face frame. For the face frame, I'll be using 3/4 inch poplar. Poplar is my go-to wood of choice whenever I'm doing a paint grade piece. It's easy to work with, and it paints very, very nicely. When laying out my face frame, I always do my end pieces first. Those will run top to bottom, you won't see any end grain, and then we'll build the entire face frame in between those 2 outer pieces. So once I get the piece cut to the appropriate height, I like to clamp it in place right on the edge of my cabinet exactly where I want it. Now you might be looking at this and thinking, hey, that seems a little short. Yeah, I do this by design. I always leave it 1/8 of an inch short so we have a little wiggle room during installation top to bottom. If there's a bow in the floor or something like that, we can move it around so that it fits perfectly. Once I get the right side done, I do the exact same thing on the left side. The only difference is the left side is the side that's going to come in contact with the wall. So I notch out this little 1/4 inch groove on that side of the cabinet. This means that that 1/4 inch piece is going to be the only point that contacts the wall. This makes scribing your cabinet to fit the wall so much easier, because you can just knock down that little 1/4 inch tab with your sander, and you don't have to worry about scribing a full 3/4 inch piece. Next, I measure to determine the distance between my two outer pieces, and I cut down a piece to fit in between them. Now, you only need to take a measurement on either your top or bottom. Figure out that distance, cut it, make sure it's nice and tight, and then cut your other piece. Don't take separate measurements on your top and your bottom, or your piece isn't going to be square. You can get away with your cabinet carcasses being a little out of square, but you definitely want your face frame to be perfect, because that's what you're going to be setting all your doors and drawers off of. Once I get my two cross pieces cut to length, I screw some more pocket holes and I begin attaching my face frame together, just with a little glue and a clamp, holding it firmly to my table, and then I just screw it in place, making a nice outer frame that we can build our internal face frame off of. Next, we need to cut our vertical divider pieces. Now, whenever you're cutting these pieces, you always want to get your measurement off of one of your ends, that internal distance. You don't want to take it in the middle of your face frame, because the wood might be bowed and you're not going to get an accurate measurement. If it's too long or short, it's going to push or pull your entire face frame out of square. So take the measurement nice and tight against that outer piece and make sure it fits in there nice and snug. Once you get that measurement, you know you can place that inside your face frame and it will be the correct distance. Now, to get everything spaced out and even and nice and square, this is how I like to do it. I like to cut these little spacer blocks. I know that I'm going to have 4 different sections, so I do the math to determine how much space I need in between those, and I cut a spacer block and I space out all of my vertical little divider pieces. If you do this correctly, by the time you get to the end of your face frame, your spacer block should fit nice and snug in that last space. This will tell you that all of your pieces are spaced exactly even. Then all you have to do is take that spacer block and cut an identical piece the exact same length. Then, using these 2 pieces, when you inset your vertical divider pieces, you put 1 spacer at the bottom, 1 spacer at the top. Not only will this ensure that your pieces are perfectly spaced out, it'll also ensure that they're set perfectly square. Remember when I said you want to make sure your face frame is perfectly square? Yeah, that's definitely the most important part of any cabinet build. If your face frame's not square, your whole cabinet's not going to be square. So take the time, do it right, and get everything lined up perfect. As you can see, I'm using clamps to hold everything firmly in place to ensure that by the time I get to the end, after hooking all those vertical dividers in place, I still have a nice, snug fit with that spacer block. Now I know everything is perfect. And then I do the exact same thing for my drawer dividers, only the spacers are going up and down instead of left to right. I also know that my drawer divider piece is the exact same size as my spacer block. I'm actually using one of the spacer blocks as my drawer divider piece. So I clamp that down, make sure that it's spaced out evenly, and I hook it in place with some pocket screws. And then I just work my way along, doing the exact same thing. I'm not even using a square or a tape measure. I'm just using those spacer blocks, and I know everything is even and perfectly square. And with that, our face frame is complete. Now we're not going to hook it in place yet. We're actually not going to hook our face frame on completely until our cabinet is installed. I'll show you how later, probably in the next video. But for now, we're just going to clamp it in place so that it doesn't flop around while we figure everything out, making sure that it is nice and tight against the top of our cabinet. Next, we're going to take care of this little end cap. We got some exposed screws, we got the side of the face frame, and we want to cover all this up and make it look pretty. So I take some of my poplar stock and I plane it down until it's nice and thin, about 1/4 of an inch. And then we are going to just glue and tack this on the end of our cabinet with a 23 gauge pin nailer. Now our front piece is going to overhang the front of our face frame so that there's just a little 1/4 of an inch reveal on the front that we can sand and fill and make that seam completely disappear. Once I get it tacked in place, I pull my face frame back and I wipe off any excess glue squeeze out to make sure that we don't accidentally glue that face frame to that trim piece. We don't want to do that yet. We'll do that later. Then I do the exact same thing for my back trim piece. But with this, I overhang it 1/4 of an inch off the back of the cabinet. This is the second contact point with the wall, and we want to do the same thing we did here on the other end of our face frame. Leaving that 1/4 of an inch overhang makes a nice surface that will make scribing so much easier. Now the idea in this decorative casing on the end is to mimic the size and dimension of your face frame. So we have the same width pieces on the outside as our face frame, and then we have the same width pieces on the top and bottom of our face frame. A little bit thicker on the top and bottom, a little bit skinnier on the sides. Next, we want to make a piece that generally lines up with our drawer divider. Now you're not actually going to see where this drawer divider starts and stops because it's going to be overhung by the cabinets. So if you're off a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch, you won't be able to tell, but you want it close. So I use a square to just wrap it around the corner and I get it lined up. Pop it in place and I tack it down with the 23 gauge nailer. After, of course, making sure it's nice and square. You don't want it all cockeyed and slanted. Or maybe you do. I mean, who am I to tell you what kind of cabinet you want to make? Maybe yours is artsy. I don't know. And just like that, our casing is done. I just like to clamp my face frame to that end to make sure it's going to pull together nice and tight. Next, we need to drill out the holes for our shelf pins inside of our cabinet. I just use this little plexiglass template. I think I got it from Rockler, and I line it up and insert my shelf pins. You could drill a bunch more holes and make these shelves adjustable, but I know that I want my shelves right in the middle, so I'm just gonna drill a single hole for one pin. Anyways, because this is a paint grade piece, my shelves are nice and simple. I just cut a piece of the birch ply and taking a piece of the poplar stock, I glue and tack it on the front. I don't bother covering up the sides or the back. The shelf will always be inserted into the cabinet and you're never gonna see those sides, so don't waste your time. Those holes will all get filled and these will get sanded before paint. But for now, I just set them in place and boom, shelves. Next, I pre-drill for all of my cabinet door hinges. And you might be wondering, well wait, aren't you gonna make cabinet doors? No, I already did, see? And if you're wondering, well, how did you make them? So here's the basic shape of my cabinet door. It's really just a frame and a piece of glass is going to be inset on the inside. Whenever I'm making any cabinet doors, whether they be glass or a floating panel, I always like to draw out the door first so that I can get my dimensions exactly how I want them. Now I know that the width of the door is 15 1/16 of an inch. I know that the height from top to bottom is 23 1/4. But I need to determine the size of all my individual pieces. My rails and stiles are 2 1/4 inches wide. I got 2 of them. That equals 4 1/2. So if I take 15 1/16, I subtract 4 1/2 inches. That gets me 10 9/16, which will be my interior piece dimension. And then of course my outer dimension, well, it is what it is, 23 1/4. And this is where things get a little different from a traditional just floating panel door. If I did a traditional floating panel door, it would look something like this. I'd have my groove that floated my panel. I'd have my tenons that fit into that slot to make a completely encased frame that would lock permanently that floating panel. And then I'd have to determine the length of my interior piece plus the extra I need for those tenons. So my dimensions would be a little bit different. But we're not doing a traditional floating panel, we're using glass. Now you might be wondering, why don't I just lock the glass in there like I would with a floating panel? Well, glass can break. I have kids, it happens. And I want a way that we can replace the glass if we need to. So I don't want to lock it in there permanently. I want to build it in a way that I can take the glass out and put new glass in when my son smashes a truck through the front. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do here. The end thickness of my doors will be 3/4 of an inch. So I'm starting with 4/4 poplar because this will be a paint grade cabinet door. And then after I mill it down and plane it and everything, I'll get to my final 3/4 inch dimension. Now I start by rough cutting all my pieces. You got to make sure to think ahead and know how many pieces you can get out so you don't waste a bunch of material. I can cut these long pieces in half and get my 2 side pieces, and then I can cut a long piece in 1/4 and I can get 4 of my bottom and top pieces. So I figured that all out and realized I needed 12 of these long 24-inch pieces to net my 8 doors. After doing that math, I take all of my pre-cut pieces over to the joiner, and first I edge joint them to get a nice straight edge on one side. Then once I have a perfectly flat edge, I place that edge against my fence and I face joint each board to get a nice flat face that will be my guide when I run them through the planer. Did somebody say planer? Cut to dramatic shot of me cranking the planer to the correct height. And go. I run all the pieces through the planer to get my final 3/4 inch thickness. You can see you got to start with the 4/4 because after joining it you lose some material and then planing it. If you try and start with 3/4, well then you're just hoping that your boards are nice and square to begin with, and let me tell you, that never happens. By starting with 4/4 we ensure that we can get them perfect before we start cutting them down to size. Speaking of cutting them down to size, the last thing I do is take my newly milled down boards over to the table saw and I cut them into strips that are 2 1/4 inches wide. I always do 2 1/4 for cabinet doors. I don't know what got that into my head, but I've been building cabinets this way for years now, and 2 1/4 just seems like a good size to do. So I don't think there's a wrong size. I mean, too thick might look silly, but anyways, after running all the pieces through the table saw, I now have all the pieces I need to start cutting my cabinet door hearts. Look at those pieces. Beautiful. Since we already determined the size that our rails and stiles will be, I set up a stop block on the miter saw and I just start cutting. Now I should note that after determining my size, I add 1/8 of an inch to the overall length of my door. You might be wondering why. Don't you want it the exact size? Well, no. I want 1/8 of an inch wiggle room. I will show you why in a little bit. Just be patient. For now, watch this nice montage of me laying out parts and pieces. This is one of those pointless points in the YouTube video that I could have left on the editing room floor, but I don't know. I just feel like it's not a real YouTube video without some unnecessary shots of me setting pieces of wood on a table. Anyways, that's enough of that. With all of my pieces cut, I can roughly lay out what each door will look like. I've got my rails, I've got my stiles, and they will be connected to form a rectangular frame just like this. But wait, you don't have any tenons. How are you going to hook those together? You're not going to use pocket screws, are you? No, see? They're already... No. Yeah, we should hook these together. But I'll show you how I'm going to do it. And not just one way, I'm going to show you 2 different ways you can do it. The first way, and my preferred method, would be the domino joiner. Now, don't get your panties in a twist. I know most people don't have a $1,300 domino joiner just laying around their shop. So as I say all the time, you could also use a cheap $60 doweling jig and some dowels. Now, I say all the time that you could use a doweling jig, but I realized I never actually show you how to do it. So after showing you how I do it with the dominoes, I will then show you exactly how I do it with the doweling jig. You get the exact same result, one's just a lot quicker. So first, the domino joiner. After marking out all my joints, I line it up with the domino joiner and I ream out all my mortises. I fill each mortise with a little glue, I insert a domino, and then I slap the whole thing together. Easy peasy. Lemon squeezy. Ha! I fit it in another video. And then I put the whole thing in clamps and I let the glue dry. One thing I do like to do before I clamp it completely down is just to double check that everything is nice and square. You don't want to clamp it up in a wonky way that's going to make your overall cabinet door out of square. That's no fun. After I'm ensured that it's square, I like to put one clamp in the middle, holding the door to the clamp itself. This just again makes sure that everything stays nice and flat and square, and you get a good successful glue up. Once that's done, I set it aside and, oh yeah, forgot. I'm going to show the doweling jig method. Now this is exactly the same as the domino joiner. I've said it before and I'll say it again, a doweling jig is just an inexpensive domino joiner that takes a lot longer to use, but it accomplishes the exact same thing. Instead of drawing a line to connect my joints and line up the domino joiner, I'm just going to number each joint so that I can get them lined back up correctly. Then I will take the doweling jig. Now this is a self-centering doweling jig, so as you clamp it down, it self-centers right in the middle of your stock. Now this is kind of hard to see, but inside that little hole there are two lines. So I just draw a pencil line matching the two lines on the doweling jig, just like that. Then using the correct size drill bit that corresponds with the size of my dowels, I drill inside each of the predetermined slot things at the top of the doweling jig. You notice that piece of green tape that keeps me from going too deep. I only want to go half the depth of a dowel, so it, goes halfway in one piece and halfway in the other piece. Anyways, after I get one piece drilled out, I then place it where it needs to go against my other piece of wood, and using those two lines that I drew from the doweling jig, I transfer those onto my connecting piece. Then all I have to do is use those two lines to re-clamp down that doweling jig, and I drill two more holes, just like you're seeing me do here. I'm not gonna lie, using this doweling jig has reminded me how much quicker the domino joiner is. Anyways, after drilling out all of your pieces, it's just the same scoop as with the dominoes. You fill each hole with a little glue, rub some glue on your dowels, you insert your dowels into each hole, and then you slap the whole thing together. Like I said, it's the exact same end result. One just costs $65 and the other about $1,300. But if you're going to do this on any scale at all, I would highly recommend to just purchase a domino joiner. If you're doing this for a profession, it will definitely pay for itself in the time that it saves. I timed myself doing the domino method and the doweling jig method, and I was able to do the domino method in 1/8 of the amount of time it took me to use the doweling jig. But the important thing is I got all of them done, and after they come out of clamps, I bet you $1 million you couldn't go through and pick out the one with dowels versus the one with dominoes. With all of our doors clamped and the glue sufficiently dry, I pop them all out of clamps, and it is time to start putting some glass in these beasts. Look, it's like my own personal picture frame. Now remember earlier when I said I like to add 1/8 of an inch to the overall length of each door? Well, that's where this technique comes in. After getting them out of clamps, I take them over to the table saw using my crosscut sled, and I trim 1/16 of an inch off the end of each door. Why? Well, if they are out of square by a few thousandths of an inch here or there, this just ensures that after running them through the table saw on my crosscut sled, which I know is perfectly square, I now know that each door is in turn perfectly square. It's just helpful when it comes to mounting all your doors. With that step done, I first sand each door down thoroughly because I love sanding. I just feel like if I say it enough over and over again that maybe I'll actually start to like sanding. After using the power sander, I hit the interior edge just by hand with a little 150 grit sandpaper. Remember, these are all going to be painted, and I'll do a final sanding before I get to that step. Next, it's time to start fitting our glass. Now, if you just want clear glass, you could go to any mom and pop window glass store in town, and they will gladly cut you a piece of glass to perfectly fit your cabinet. But I wanted something a bit fancier. So I found this website online. I honestly forget the name of it, but I'll include a link in the video description, and I ordered this kind of vintage textured glass. It's a little, the word I'm looking for, not see-through. Anyways, I purposely ordered the glass about a ½ inch bigger than my interior opening, as you can see here. Now, we have to set the glass down in the door using this ½ inch rabbiting bit. So after plopping this bit into my router, I adjust it so that it's just about a 1/16 of an inch over the thickness of the glass. This will just ensure that our glass sits down just below the surface of our cabinet door. Now, whenever I'm using a big bit, now when I say big bit, meaning it wants to take off a ½ inch at a time, I never do the full ½ inch to start with. I start by doing a shallow, maybe 1/4 inch deep pass just to knock down all the edges, and then after I do that all the way around, I do my final ½ inch depth. This also helps just prevent any chips or tear outs you might get as you're routing out the inside of your cabinet door. So zoom, and just like that, I've routed out a ½ inch little lip for our glass to sit down inside that cabinet door, nice and tight. But wait, we have a little bit of a problem. Because our router bit is round, as you can see, it leaves the corners rounded over. This is a problem because our glass is square, not round. So we gotta knock that corner down to match the profile of our glass. Now, lots of times I will just eyeball this with a chisel and knock it out and not worry that it's not perfect. But if you want it to be absolutely dead accurate, what I like to do is take another one of my cabinet doors, doesn't matter if it's routed out yet or not, and clamp it down on top of the router door that we need to chisel. As you can see, this creates a nice guide in that corner that'll give us a surface to rest our chisel on and make sure that we get a perfect profile squared off cut. Then all you have to do is stick your chisel down there, tap, 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 and voila. Voila. Man, I always got a problem with that one. Gotta think of another word to say. Dun da da da! A nice squared off corner. Now, if you've done it correctly and all your measurements are right, your piece of glass should fit perfectly recessed into the back of your cabinet door. I like just a 1/16 of an inch maybe of wiggle room left to right to allow for wood movement. Look, it's like a window. And every time I go behind it, my facial expression magically changes. Man, that seemed a lot cooler of a shot in my head. Now, our glass may be recessed in at this point, but I have a feeling it's gonna fall out. And there's no way to hook the door onto the cabinet, so there's a few more things we have to take care of. Next, I'm gonna mark out to drill for my European style hinges. I got this cheap little, I don't know, $1.50 piece of plastic that works as a template. I know you can get a bunch of fancy jigs, but this is cheap and it works great. I just mark out where my hole needs to be drilled and where the corresponding screws for the hinges are gonna land. After marking that about 2½ inches down from either side, I take it over the drill press and I just eyeball the depth. Yep, just eyeball it. Because the Forstner bit is the exact same depth as the cabinet hinge. So if you drill so it's flush with the top of the Forstner bit, your cabinet hinge will fit perfect every time. Don't overcomplicate these things, just get it done already. After drilling out the holes for the hinges, I like to take the piece back over to my workbench and reinsert that piece of glass and just double check and make sure the hinge isn't going to run into that glass at all. There is a little bit of an overhang on the hinge and you don't want it overhanging onto the glass itself. There's about 1/8 of an inch reveal, which is perfect. Next, we're going to secure the glass in place using these little glass metal retainer clips. Now these are Rockler brand. They're my personal favorite to use because they're low profile and they have a nice look to them, but there are a ton of different options for these clips out there. You can get them clear, you can get them white, you can get them black. So just use whatever you feel comfortable with, but I will put a link to these in the video description down below. Now, I've seen some people put like 20 of these clips on one cabinet door. That seems a little excessive, if you ask me. I like to put 4 of them. I don't put any on the top or the bottom because sometimes they interfere with the face frame of the cabinet. So I like to put 1 above and below the cabinet hinges, and then I just match that on the other side. 4 is plenty. The glass isn't going to go anywhere, and if you have to replace it, well, you only have to take off 4 clips instead of 20. Let's be serious, that's just crazy sauce. It is important to note that the screws that come with these clips are tiny and probably not the strongest screws out there, so I always pre-drill every hole and then I just use a screwdriver to hand screw them in so that I don't snap the heads off. But what do you know? I've created this beautiful looking shaker style glass cabinet door. The glass is nice and secure, it's pre-drilled for hinges, and it's ready to install. Did you know this video is sponsored by Squarespace? And if you go to my website and you want to find Rubio Monocoat, it's really easy because with Squarespace, I was able to embed a link into my website. You click on it and you'll wind up over at Rubio's website, which is pretty handy. Squarespace has some other awesome features, like the fact that you don't have to be a web designer to create a website on Squarespace. They've just introduced their design intelligence. What's design intelligence, you might ask? Well, they take 2 decades of industry-leading design expertise, they mix it with a little cutting-edge AI technology, and they unlock your strongest creative potential. Design intelligence basically empowers anyone to build a beautiful website, more personalized websites tailored to their unique needs, and craft a bespoke digital identity to use across one's entire online presence. They also offer cool features like in-person sales, where you can take credit cards directly through the Squarespace app, and it automatically updates your quantities on your website, so you don't have to keep track in both places. Let's say your business changes over time and you want to change your domain name. Well, you can purchase a brand new domain name directly through Squarespace, and you can have multiple if you want, and it all directs people to the same website. You can have unlimited products on your website, so if you have a store that has a lot of SKUs, it doesn't matter because you can put as many as you want on there. And the best part about Squarespace is that it is so stinking easy to use. Craig will tell you, I'm horrible when it comes to computers, and I was even able to figure out Squarespace. So if you want to check it out, this is what you're going to want to do. Go to squarespace.com/bourbonmothwoodworking and you're going to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Or use the coupon code BOURBONMOTHWOODWORKING at checkout and you're all set. Check it out down there, or there's a link in the video description as well. Whenever I have a face frame that overhangs my cabinet box and I'm doing overhang doors, I like to use these Euro style face frame hinges. They attach right onto the face frame, they're super easy to install. You just measure down how far you want the hinge to land with what overhang you want, and you just screw them in place. Then if you need to adjust them slightly, the adjustability moves them back and forth or in or out. And so I just install all my doors and work my way across the entire piece until they are all done. Whenever I'm building cabinets with cabinet doors above and a drawer below, I always install my cabinet doors first. That way I can take the measurement off my cabinet doors to determine the size of my drawer below and get it exactly the same as the span of my cabinet doors. So with that measurement in mind, I head over to the table saw and I start making a few shaker style cabinet drawer faces. Now, I'm not going to show you every stinking detail on how to do this, because I've already made a video showing you just that. It's in part 3 of my cabinet building series, so if you want to see exactly how to make a good shaker style door, I recommend after this video you head over and watch that video. But basically, the shaker style door is made out of 5 pieces. You got 4 frame pieces called your rails and stiles, with this groove down the center of each one that will hold a floating panel, and a tenon that connects all your frame pieces. Then for drawer faces, I like to take a piece of 1/2 inch MDF and I rabbet it around all 4 sides. This creates a nice panel that I can slide into my frame, making it inset on one side and flush on the back side where I attach it to my drawer box. I'm using MDF because, like I mentioned before, this is a paint grade piece and MDF paints very nicely. All right, enough dancing. Let's keep going here. With all of my drawer face pieces cut, I glue them up and insert my panel. And once I get all of them done, I'm just going to set them aside to dry, and while they dry, I can start working on my drawer boxes. To mount these drawers, I will be using Blum undermount drawer slides. They're my go-to drawer slide. They work amazing and they're crazy easy to install. I like to cut a piece of ply the exact distance of the inside of my cabinet box. I slide it right up against my face frame and I mark where the face frame comes in contact with that piece. Then I take these mounting brackets that come with the undermount drawer slides, I line them up on those markings where my face frame is, and I just screw them in place. Boom, nice and easy. Then I go to the back of my cabinet and I insert that piece flush with the back of my cabinet. Now I know those brackets are perfectly going to line up with my face frame on the front because that's where I took my measurements from. Then I hold that piece in place just with a few handy dandy pocket screws, and then all I have to do is take my drawer slides, insert them into that bracket on the back, and boom, drawer slides are installed. It's really that easy. I didn't use a tape measure. I didn't have to fiddle around with spacers or this or that. All you have to do is hook the drawer slide to the front of your face frame with a little set screw and you are ready to boogie. And by boogie I mean start building your drawer boxes. With your drawer slides installed, I take my measurements for my drawer box right off my slides. Now I'm just determining the overall width of my drawers. I know the length is going to be determined by the drawer slide themselves. For this project, I'm using 15-inch drawer slides, so my drawer boxes are 15 inches deep by whatever the space is between my drawer slides. So I start cutting down all of my pieces, making sure that each piece has a nice 1/4 of an inch groove on the bottom of it to hold the bottom of my drawer box, which in this case is a piece of 1/4 inch Baltic birch ply. Well, the whole drawer is Baltic birch. Hey, if you want to know exactly how to do these, there's a video on that as well in my cabinet building series. I show you step by step so you can make your own quick and easy Baltic birch drawer boxes. Birch. That's a funny word. With my drawer boxes done, I install the little Blum orange clip things in each corner and I slide them into my carcass. Then I just hammer them in there a few times just to imprint the little tab on the back of the drawer slide on the back of the drawer. Once I leave a little notch showing me where that tab is, I drill a little hole. This hole will catch that tab and hold the drawer firmly in place. Then all I have to do is insert the drawer back in and push until it clicks. And boom, drawer is installed. I mean, it's crazy easy. Why anyone's using side-mounted drawer slides anymore, I don't know. Stop it. Seriously, stop it. About 3 minutes later, I have all my drawers installed and I am ready to start hooking on my drawer faces, which by this time are nice and dry and ready to be pulled out of clamps. Cut to shot of me pulling them out of clamps for continuity. All right, now let's get them installed. Whenever I'm installing overmount drawer faces, the easiest way to do it is by using these Rockler drawer mounting clamp things. There's a right side, there's a left side, you hook them onto your drawer box, and then you just slide your drawer face in place. It's just, I mean, it's simple. You don't have to use double-sided tape or clamps or anything. Well, I guess these are clamps. Anyways, you slide it into place. You get it lined up left to right. I like to use a spacer block. I know all my spaces on this are conveniently 1 inch, so I stick a 1 inch spacer block in there, make it nice and tight against my upper cabinet doors, and you just clamp it down. Then you open the drawer, screw the drawer face on, and boom. I feel like I'm saying boom a lot in this video. Sorry about that. Anyways, you take off your clamps and your drawer face is installed. Man, it's so easy. Then you just keep doing the exact same thing, working your way down until all of your drawer faces are installed and it is looking nice and fresh. Boom. Sorry, I just want to say it one more time. And there you have it. Our cabinet is completely built and ready to start breaking down for paint. That's right. After we get everything fit just the way we want it, we take it all apart so that we can paint it. I start by taking off the drawer faces and numbering each one. I also number the drawer box so I know which face goes with which box. Then I like to take a piece of tape, cover up the number on the drawer face so that when I paint it, I can still see it. After I get the drawer boxes and drawer faces off, I take off each cabinet door. You also want to make sure to label these appropriately. You spend a lot of time getting them aligned perfectly, so it's going to be a lot easier if you put all the hinges and doors back in the same place. So I start by taking hinges out and labeling each hinge. There are 4 different sections of door hinges, so I just label them 1LB for section 1, that's 1 left side bottom, and I do the same on the door itself. Then I stick a little piece of tape over the label on the door, because like I mentioned, we're going to paint these, and you don't want to paint over your freshly labeled door and not be able to find it again. I also take the time to label each piece of glass. This probably isn't as important, all the glass is identical, but I'm just kind of OCD, so that's how I roll. Speaking of roll, who's that guy rolling around in the background? What a weirdo. And then I go through and I pull off every single drawer slide. You don't need to label these. They literally are all identical, so you could put them back any which way you want. Just make sure you have help while you're doing this so you don't have to lift anything heavy. That's what children are for. Then if you remember from our last video, we never actually attached our face frame because we wanted to make it very easy to install this beast. So then you can go ahead and pull your face frame off as well. Then finally you can remove all of the shelves. Gosh, that guy just keeps popping up. And set them aside to be sanded in just a minute. And then lastly, is that a real word? I think so, just sounds funny. Lastly, you want to remove all the screws holding the boxes together. There have definitely been a few times I forgot those screws were in there and just tried to pull the boxes apart and was like, oh yeah, dummy, you screwed them together. And of course you want to label each box so that it corresponds with all of your labeled parts and pieces. Now I should have done this step before I ever put the boxes together, but you want to add some pocket screws on the lower half of that bottom divider piece. This is just going to give us a nice way to attach the face frame. We will tack it everywhere else and cover up those nails with our trim pieces. This is the only spot that we couldn't cover up with a trim piece, so just throw some pocket holes in there. And then we sand. And sand. Ooh, and sand. Yeah. And then we move on to our shelves. Now, before I sand my shelves, we want a nice, smooth, seamless transition from that face piece to our plywood. So I take this Mohawk 2-part epoxy putty, I smear it together, and I fill all the nail holes and the seam between the plywood and the face. And then I sand. And sand. And sand. I hate sanding. And with that, we are finally ready to start painting. The only problem is I don't have a paint booth. I don't have a paint room. It's pouring rain outside. So the only place I can paint is right in the middle of my shop. And I'm not going to just do it on the floor and get paint all over my tools. So I am once again going to make a Dexter style kill room / paint booth right in the middle of my shop and paint away. I start by covering the entire floor with a little of that ram board carpet, I don't know, cardboard stuff, and I tape it down so it doesn't slide all over the place while I'm walking on it. Then I bought the cheapest plastic they sell at the paint store. It's just really thin mill plastic, and I unroll the whole thing. This could have been a really bad idea. Anyways, once I get it unrolled, I just staple it to the ceiling. Not with any fancy staples either. I stole the stapler out of my wife's office and I just staple it right to the ceiling. The staples will just pull out when I pull the plastic down, so it really doesn't mess anything up. And then I just fold the plastic all down to create a nice little bubble where I can make the magic happen. And by magic, I mean kind of a mediocre job at spraying these cabinets. I'm not a great painter. I don't really know what I'm doing. I can get the job done, and I'll show you exactly how I do it, and sure, it comes out good enough. But I'm sure if a painter were to watch this process, he'd say, "Whoa, bro, you're doing that all wrong." But I can only teach you what I know. And that's not much. But to spray these, I'll be using the Fuji Spray Q5 Platinum HVLP spray system. I'll be using the T70 spray gun with a 1.8 gauge needle. That's what I personally have found to work the best on latex paint. Is it right? I don't know, but it's what I use. Now I'm lazy. I mention that a lot, and because I'm lazy, I don't like spraying oil-based paint. I like going for water, so I spray a coat of this premium wall and wood primer from Sherwin-Williams, and then I love this emerald urethane enamel paint. It's super hard, super durable, and it actually sprays pretty good. I will say this, even if I don't know what I'm doing, I can sure look the part. Damn, I look good. Alright, let's do this. Let's get some paint on these things. So, I like to start out just spraying a test piece. That seems like a logical thing to do. Make sure your gun's all the way it should be. Now, I heard that you want to have the gun pointed straight down, not at an angle, and you're just doing nice, light, even passes. I should also mention that I'm not spraying the paint straight out of the can. I thin the paint down about 10 to 15% just with water straight out of the tap. Now that's probably not right either, but it works great. You don't want too thick a paint or you're going to get orange peel. You don't want too thin a paint or it's just going to run all over the place and be a horrible mess. So 10 to 15%, and just experiment around a little on a scrap piece. Find the mix that is laying down perfect and just go for it. Don't try and coat too much on there in any one pass either. Start out with just nice, light passes. You can come back and fill in with paint and do multiple passes. It's better to do multiple light passes than try and put it on too thick and deal with runs and splatter and drips and having to sand it down. And anyways, just go easy. Patience, patience. But all that being said, you can be a little more liberal with your primer because you will be sanding it down before you put actual paint on it. So just go heavy, but not too heavy, but not too light, you know, just make it look white. That rhymed. A painting rhyme. Woohoo! Then after I've given all my primer a sufficient amount of time to dry, I like to lightly go over everything with a piece of 220 grit sandpaper. The primer has that water in it that likes to raise the grains, so sanding it down will make it nice and smooth and ready for paint. But before you put paint on, you got to get all the dust off. So I take a piece of tack cloth, I stretch it out as big as it'll go. As you can see here, it's kind of a pain because it's all folded over a zillion times. And then I wad it into a ball. This is the best method. You can use this one piece of tack cloth on all your boxes and it'll still be going strong. By wadding it into a ball, you get a lot more little surfaces that can pick up all the little pieces of dust. Then I mix up some paint. As you can see, this paint is pretty thin. I mix it again with about 10 to 15% water, and you don't want it thick and globby. That's just going to make a horrible paint job. And then you do nice light coats. You're going to be doing multiple coats of the actual paint, so just start with a little. Now this is where my method probably deters from most people a little bit. I don't spray my face frame. Because we're going to install this face frame after we get our cabinet boxes all situated, we are definitely going to have to do a little touch up after we get our trim on, after we get it caulked against the wall, and if it's sprayed and we touch it with a brush, well, if there's any brush strokes, they're really going to stand out. But if we just start by brushing the whole thing, touching up with a brush is just going to be the same method that we started with, and you're never going to be able to tell. Now there is a right way and a wrong way to brush. You want to start by rolling on the paint with a foam roller and then tipping the paint with the brush. That means just lightly going over the top of the paint to pull all the air bubbles that the roller left behind out and making a nice, silky, smooth surface. Do that on every little part of the face frame and it will actually look pretty darn good. You're probably not going to be able to tell that it was brushed. At least nobody will be able to tell unless you say, hey, look really close. That's brushed and that's sprayed. But just don't do that. So after rolling and brushing the whole upper surface, I just go over the interior by hand with a brush. Then I come over and I check my paint job. It is nice and smooth, and we are not gonna sand in between coats at this point. Sanding could just mess it up and cause more cleanup. If it's smooth and glassy, just throw some more paint down. As you can see, with one coat of primer and one coat of paint, it's already looking pretty darn good. But I'm still gonna do about 2 or 3 extra coats of paint because I'm crazy. So after doing that, not showing you because that would have been boring, my painting of my boxes and my drawer faces is done. So I pull all of my boxes out of my little spray bubble and we can move on to, yes, cabinet doors. You didn't think I forgot those, did you? I actually did forget that, but I'm watching the video while I voice this over, so I saw it and then I remembered. So then I made it seem like I hadn't forgot. So we put all of our cabinet doors and our shelves in our little spray booth. These are the last things that need to be painted. And once again, we coat everything with primer. Just nice and easy. I mean, if you kind of squint your eyes, I really do kind of look like I know what I'm doing. Maybe a little bit, at least. Anyways, you just paint everything that needs to be painted. I will say the cabinet doors are kind of a pain because all the little edges and nooks and crannies. And then finally, I paint a piece of quarter round that we will eventually use to trim out the bottom of the cabinet. All right, our carcass and face frame is all painted. So while we're waiting for our cabinet doors and shelves and everything else to dry, I can start installing the carcass and face frame. But before I do that, I wanted to address this hole in the wall here. Now, a few months ago, I was helping a friend remodel his house. We were tearing out some drywall, and in the drywall, in between the studs, we found this really old bottle. And in the bottle, there was a note, and it said, "My name's Carl. I built this house." Okay, I thought that was pretty cool. Old bottle, note from the previous owner. So I wanted to do something similar. But as cool as Carl was, I thought he kind of missed an opportunity to do something really cool and make it a little more exciting for the next owner of the house. So I put together a little care package that I'm gonna put in the wall. Now, in this package, I have a half-drunk bottle of scotch with bloody fingerprints on it. I have a bloody steak knife wrapped in paper towels. Okay. I have a note with some random map coordinates on it with the words "Liars sleep forever." I think the map coordinates are just to the middle of a field here in town. I've got 3 bags of mysterious white powder. This is just cornstarch, but the next owner won't know that. And then I have a key. This is to my old storage unit that I don't own anymore. But to them, it'll just be a random key. So I don't know who's gonna find this bag, but I'll tell you what, it's gonna be a lot more exciting than that dumb note Carl left. So we'll just close this up, stick it in here, and maybe somebody will find it in a few hundred years. So before we can start bringing cabinet boxes and everything in, I had to clean all the junk out of the way. Now I will divert that outlet up into the cabinet box, but we'll wait till we get everything in place to do that. So I just start loading these cabinets in from my shop. It's nice that I work so close to the job site. I mean, that doesn't happen often. It's also nice that I built these in 4 separate pieces and not one giant 11-foot piece that I'd have to lug into the house. So I do 1 piece, 2 piece, red piece, blue piece. Anyways, I get all my pieces roughly in place and then I bring in my face frame. I just slide my face frame into place, stick it against the cabinet, make sure it lines up good on the end, make sure it lines up good on the other end, and we're done. That's it. Installed. Man, if only it was that easy. Now, first thing we have to do is get rid of this baseboard that was already on there. So I put a piece of tape on the face frame so that I don't get pencil marks all over that, and I transfer a line onto the baseboard to know where I have to cut it to fit the cabinet. And then I slide the face frame out of the way, nice and easy, and just using a little multi-tool, I cut the little 3/4, oh whoa, that's bigger than 3/4 chunk of trim out of the way, and I slide the cabinet back into place. Then after doing that side, I slide all the cabinet boxes over, measure, and I do the other side, getting rid of that little piece of trim. These are just little pieces of trim because when I put the trim up, I knew eventually there was going to be a cabinet here, so I just left it a little long on each side. Then I test to make sure that my face frame fits in there nice and tight, which it does. Now remember how I left that 1/4-inch piece on the back so I could scribe to fit the wall? Well, magically, the first time in the history of cabinet building, it just fits perfect. I didn't even have to scribe. Not only on that side, but on the other side too. This never happens. It's literally a miracle, but I'm not complaining. Now it is time to take our face frame out and actually hook our cabinet boxes together to make them one giant piece. So I start by clamping just each seam together with a few clamps, making sure that it is nice and tight and lined up. And then I use a few of these little trim head screws and I insert them in places that you're not going to see. So in the bottom, in the top, right behind where the face frame is going to go, and then I toenail one in the back because that's going to be covered up with the top, so you're not going to see that. You just don't want a bunch of holes inside your cabinet. That's what you're trying to avoid. And then miracle number 2, it was perfectly level. I literally didn't have to put a single shim in this thing. What is going on? Nothing in my house is ever level. I have successfully found the one perfectly square and level corner in my entire house. Next, it is time to hook on our face frame. For that, I will be using this Tight Bond Quick and Thick. I love this stuff for face frames because it doesn't run. It's thick enough that when you put it someplace, it just sits there until you stick a piece of wood against it. So I put a nice little bead on all of my exposed surfaces that the face frame will come in contact with. And then I slide my face frame into place, inserting it behind that piece of trim on the far left, and making sure it is nice and tight on the far right. Now it's just going to be glued into place on this corner, so I put a lot of clamps in there to get the seam nice and tight while the glue dries. Next, we are going to tack it onto the top all the way across. That's going to be covered up with a piece of trim that goes around the top, and we tack it on the bottom. That'll be covered up with a piece of 1/4 round. And then we hook it in the middle with those pocket holes that we drilled under that little middle divider. I'm not going to hook it onto the vertical divider pieces whatsoever. It's just going to be pulled nice and tight against those, and the glue is going to do its job. Next, we need to shim the back of the cabinet. Because we left that little 1/4-inch overhang, it is tight on that corner, but there's a 1/4-inch gap all the way along. So I stick a shim in there, I mark where it's nice and tight along the back of the cabinet, and then I insert the shim all the way along to make sure that it comes out the exact same distance as that far corner. Tap, 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 boom, boom, boom. Shim goes in. Darn it, I was trying to rhyme again, but I couldn't think of a good rhyme for boom, boom, boom. Then you find your studs and you attach the cabinets to the wall. I just use some screws right up at the very top underneath there. You're not going to see this unless you get down on your belly and look way up under there. And then I cut out a hole in the back of the cabinet to expose that outlet that I covered up. Remember that thing? And then to access that outlet from inside the cabinet box, I drill a giant hole in my freshly painted cabinets. What the heck did you just do? And then I vacuum up all the dust and I insert a nice little metal cord grommet to make it look all pretty. We like pretty. And by this time, my glue is dry and I can remove all my clamps off of that corner. It actually came together very nicely. No gaps in that seam whatsoever. That's the other nice thing about the quick and thick, is that it really likes to fill in any voids. Next, it is time to get our top situated. Because this is an 11-foot built-in, I couldn't use one continuous piece of plywood. So we're gonna have to have a seam in the middle. But that's okay, I will show you how to make that seam disappear as if it was never there. Because that's what disappear means. So you should already have known that when I said make it disappear. But anyways, I get my two pieces situated, and where it comes together in that seam, you don't want just a butt joint. I cut each piece at a 45 so they can lap over each other just a little bit. This will make sanding them smooth much, much easier. As you can see there, it's an okay cut, but it's fine, it'll work. And then I attach the top to the cabinet just up from the bottom through those little brace pieces that run between each cabinet. And then before I hook the other piece on, I put a nice thick coating of that quick and thick glue on that seam that I can smush together and just make ooze out and fill all those little holes and gaps. Just like that. Then I clamp it down where I want it to be, and I put a few screws in to hold it nice and firm. And then I take off my clamps. I feel like that's kind of obvious. It's not going to leave those clamps on there forever. And then I sand the corner of the face frame to make it nice and smooth. You just want to make sure not to wrap around the other side, because the other side you sprayed. You just want to sand on the front where you brushed, so that when you touch it up, you won't be able to tell. Of course, the foreman had to come over and make sure it looked okay. He approved, so I got on to making that seam in the top disappear. Again, I'm using that Mohawk 2-part epoxy putty. I just smush it in there all along the crack, and we'll sand that down later. Next, it is time to trim out the top. For this, I just cut some pieces of 1 3/4 poplar, and I smear a nice bead of the quick and thick glue just along the top. That's the only place it needs to be glued, and if you put it on the bottom, you risk it oozing out all over the face of your cabinet, which you do not want. And then I tack it in place, making sure that it is just a hair above the plywood. I mean like a 1/64 of an inch above the plywood. Just enough that we can very easily come back with the sander and sand it all down flush. So after tacking it on the corner, I just slowly work my way along that seam, making sure that, yeah, it's just barely sticking up. It's much easier to sand it off if it's sticking up than sand down the plywood if it's too low. You don't want it too low. After we do the front, we do our corner at a nice 45, and same thing, just barely sticking up. Just barely stick. Okay, I'm done, sorry. And then I sand the whole thing smooth. Well, why don't you fill that crack? Well, we will, but it's much easier to fill after we sand it smooth, fill it, and then we'll sand it again. See? You fill that gap with all that Mohawk 2-part epoxy, just smeared in there nice and good. And if you do this right, this will make that transition between your trim piece and your plywood top absolutely disappear once you paint it. It'll just look like one continuous piece, which is what we want. And then finally, before we paint anything, I like to go around with a caulking gun. I say caulking, some say caulking, but caulking is what I grew up saying, and my mom would be blushing if I said caulking. So you caulk all your seams. And then I like to put some tape on that corner just to protect our sprayed side from getting any brush strokes on it. And we just brush on a little primer on everywhere that we sanded down or any unfinished wood. We'll prime it, we'll sand it, and then we'll put our final coats of paint. Once again, we are using the rolling and brushing method. Remember, if you roll and then lightly brush over the top, you can really make all your brush strokes completely disappear. I mean, look at that. It looks, dare I say, perfect. I dare. It does. It does. It looks perfect. And then once it is primed and sanded, we paint everything. Because brushing and painting does put a little thicker of a coat on, you're probably good with just 2 coats of actual paint on top of the primer. Here's where you can see the rolling and brushing method in its prime. You roll on. It's okay if it's cross or forward or backwards. Direction doesn't matter at all. Just get the paint on there evenly coated over the entire surface. Now you can see it's got a texture to it because of the roller. Part of that's the foam, part of that's the bubbles that the roller left behind. So once you get it on, you just do little sections at a time, working your way along the top. This is my very last section on the top. Make sure it's nice and smooth. You feather it out kind of at the ends. Okay, we get it. It's enough rolling already. And then once it's all rolled, you take the brush and just using the very tip of the brush, barely putting any pressure down, you just lightly drag it across the top. Just barely. Gentle, like a butterfly kiss. Pulling out all those air bubbles, removing all that texture, and because you're using thinned down paint, all that paint will run back together, level out, and leave a perfectly glass-like surface. Beautiful. Then once it's dry, we can remove our tape, and I dare you to try and point out which sections are sprayed and which sections are brushed. Now, actually, I don't dare you because you watched the video, but anybody that walks into your home isn't going to be able to tell, because if you brush right, it still is a nice, perfect, smooth surface. And it makes installation just so stinking easy. All right, enough peel and tape. Let's get on with the video. With our top on and our carcass and face frame all painted, we can start doing the fun stuff, which is getting this whole thing put together. I start by inserting all my shelves and then reinserting all my drawer slides, just hooking them onto those pre-hung brackets on the very back and attaching them to the face frame with just a small set screw. Then it is time to insert our drawer boxes. Now these are just Baltic birch drawer boxes that I wiped down with a light coating of linseed oil just to make them pop a little bit, and I just slide them in place until they click. Then I take all my drawer faces and I remove that piece of tape on the back to determine which drawer goes where. I find the drawer face that lines up with the box. I put my screws through the drawer box until they're just barely sticking out the front, like 1/8 of an inch. Just enough to really hurt if you stuck your knee against one of them. And then I take my drawer face. Now these already have holes in them because we hung them once, and I line those existing screw holes up with my screws that are sticking out, and I screw them in place. If there's any tension when you're screwing those screws in, it means you missed your hole, so stop. It should go in nice and easy. And then you just repeat on all the other drawers until they are all hung exactly where you left them before we tore this whole thing apart at the beginning of the video. Then after reinserting the glass into my cabinet doors and reinstalling my hinges according to where they needed to go based on how we pre-labeled them, I rehang, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, I rehang all my cabinet doors. I should also mention that at some point along here, I added a piece of 1/4 round trim to the bottom of the cabinet, but apparently I just decided not to film myself doing it. With all my doors and drawer faces hung, I can start installing hardware. Now I am using this hardware jig from True Position Tools. They sent it to me, I was skeptical, but I gotta tell you, it's frickin' awesome. It makes installing hardware just super easy, because you can set it up exactly where you want the hardware to go and just drill. You don't even have to mark on your cabinet or anything. There's measurements on the jig and bada bada bing, boom, done. Just screw on the hardware. For these drawers, my wife picked this polished nickel pull thingamabob. I don't know, that's above my pay grade. Word of wisdom, if you're building cabinets for your wife, just let her pick out the hardware, okay? That's like her thing, just don't get involved. And then for the top, she wanted these little polished nickel latch things. I don't even know what they're called, but they look kind of nice, kind of old school. And that is it. Believe it or not, it's done. As you can see, when building built-ins, preparation is everything. If you can plan ahead to what your install is going to be like, you can make the installation process super simple. Remember what it used to look like in here? Way back when, it was just a hole in the wall, and now look at it. a beautiful, functional piece of cabinetry that will elevate the space and eloquentize isn't a word. Make it prettier. Boom. Boom indeed.